Welcome to Regence Radio. I'm your host, Gretchen Kilby. Many young men who have anorexia can't eat, and their bodies are breaking down. Often they recognize the signs, but can't imagine the problem is really an eating disorder.
I was just afraid to talk about it, and even when I tried, people were like, guys don't have eating disorders, and I made myself believe that.
In this episode of Regence Radio, we'll hear from two men who struggled with anorexia. Each faced delays in getting treatment because of a lack of awareness about males with eating disorders. They share their stories and advice on how to reach out for help. We'll also hear from a counselor about how to recognize when someone may have an eating disorder. Patrick Bergstrom and Matt Wetsel both developed anorexia when they were in their late teens and early 20s. Patrick was a star high school lacrosse player.
I was a perfectionist and pretty concerned about my image, my popularity, and in college things kind of broke down, and I faced some adversity and didn't play as much as I wanted to in college and lacrosse, and that was my way of expressing myself, and wasn't big on emotions and feelings, and without lacrosse I didn't have my outlet.
Patrick began to exercise obsessively, and he drastically curtailed how much he was eating, all in an effort to be a better lacrosse player and get more time on the field. Matt's anorexia came out of a serious depression he experienced the summer before heading off to college. He couldn't eat or sleep. He eventually got to a point where it hurt more to eat than not to eat. People began asking him how much weight he had lost, thinking he was on a diet. He stepped on a scale to find out.
Once I had some way to quantify it and measure it, then it kind of became an obsession that I don't even understand, because I was not dissatisfied with my body image. I didn't think I was overweight. I wasn't. There was no real justification for doing it. It almost became just like a game that distracted me from what was really wrong.
Both Matt and Patrick experienced the common signs of anorexia: self-starvation, avoiding public settings where food is served, fainting spells and blacking out, and drastic weight loss. Patrick's excessive exercise is common to athletes dealing with anorexia. Matt found himself withdrawing from other people and becoming more secretive, especially around his college roommate.
I would always try to get dressed when he wasn't in the room. I didn't want him to see me with my shirt off. I would try to go shower when people weren't there, because I knew that they would notice how much weight I had lost and I guess how unhealthy I was, and I didn't want them to ask questions.
Matt says he knew something was wrong and that he never intended to starve himself. At some point, he says, the anorexia just took over.
There's this driving force reinforcing these negative eating behaviors that you're engaging in, but there was always a little voice inside my head being like, you need to stop this. This is not good. This is not healthy. You're killing yourself. But it was so much easier to continue than it was to stop, because it became a part of my life. It guided everything I was doing.
Patrick had a similar experience.
Outside of work, I was just consumed with thinking about not eating, and if I had to eat, would I be able to keep it down, and does anybody know that I'm struggling? And not what a typical person would be thinking about. You're so absorbed in your eating disorder.
Each man had a kind of epiphany moment where they realized they needed help. They reached out, and unfortunately, their concerns were dismissed. Patrick says this happened several times.
I just heard that, guys don't have eating disorders.
Matt was told, if you're not worried that you're fat, then you're not anorexic. It took so much courage to even broach the subject, he says, that he was scared off from speaking to anyone else for another 6 months. He finally contacted a friend who had dealt with substance abuse, and she directed him to a 12-step program for eating disorders. He also found a college support group. At first, they too brushed him aside.
They're like, well, I think you would definitely benefit from the group, but it's women only. It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage to go over there, and they tell me I can't attend because of my gender. In fact, they hadn't even considered the possibility that someone who wasn't a woman would come, which, looking back, is just, crazy, because here I am.
Matt eventually prevailed, and they let him into the group, and a year later, he had his eating disorder under control. Patrick found one of the few residential treatment programs in the country that works with men. During his treatment, he was the only man there, and that almost scared him away. But he too stuck with it and put an end to 4.5 years of suffering. The process wasn't easy for either Patrick or Matt, but both say despite frequent rebuffs, the best thing they did was to tell someone about their problem. Melissa Grossman, an eating disorders counselor based in Portland, Oregon, says it's important to find the right person to talk to.
Make sure it's somebody who knows about eating disorders before you approach them, because getting a negative response when you're trying so hard to reach out and it's such a difficult thing is really, really hard.
Grossman also suggests that people keep an eye out for warning signs that there may be a problem. Drastic weight loss isn't always the best indicator. For example, people with bulimia, a disease of binge eating followed by purging or vomiting, don't always lose weight. The key for a person who is experiencing an eating disorder, and for their families, says Grossman, is to pay attention to eating habits. Changes here often show up before any physical signs of an eating disorder.
You know, if you're an adult and you have a partner who all of a sudden never eats meals with you, I already ate, don't want to go out to eat, or when they go out to eat, just sort of picks at their food. If you have a kid who says, I ate at school, or I'll eat later, or I'm going out with friends eating, or if they don't want to eat in front of other people, but they'll eat by themselves.
In the case of bulimia, says Grossman, there's another common warning sign.
I have parents who sometimes say, all of a sudden I was buying all this food, and I could never keep food in the house. I didn't know where it was going. Food was disappearing. If people are binging and purging, they can get rid of huge amounts of food in a very short amount of time.
Grossman says, as with Matt and Patrick, the food will only be part of the equation. But once it's obvious eating is an issue, you need to get the problem out into the open. Matt says his need for secrecy kept him from being honest with himself and others. He lost many friends during his 2-year struggle with anorexia. Until you face the truth, Matt says, you'll continue to suffer.
You have to want to reach out more than you're afraid. You have to set those fears aside, because if you don't, you're not going to get the help you need or the support you need.
Matt overcame some of his fear of reaching out with the help of a website he recommends called something-fishy.org. It's an eating disorders site that has advice pages, such as what to tell your friends and family. Matt handed this page to his mom to start their conversation about his struggle with anorexia. Since getting treatment, Patrick has created an eating disorders website and organization of his own called I Chose to Live. He offers an online support group, keeps a blog, and chats with men and women dealing with eating disorders. He admits that right now there are only women participating in his support group, but he's hopeful his story will encourage more men to reach out. In the few years since Patrick and Matt first sought help, more organizations have begun offering treatment for men with eating disorders. Check with your medical provider or visit the website edreferral.com. There you'll find information about treatment programs or counselors in your state. For more information about your health or to listen to our other podcast stories, visit myregence.com. You can also subscribe to our free podcast by searching for Regence Radio in the iTunes Store. I'm Gretchen Kilby. Thanks for listening to Regence Radio.